All right. I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening for our next virtual training series session. My name is Dan Kovatz. I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Democratic County Chairs Association. And tonight we have a really interesting topic that we thought would be very beneficial, not just for our county chairs, but for all of our boot camp alumni. We're getting into the thick of the campaign season, and a lot of us are going to be interacting with the press. And I figure it'd be a good idea to go over some different press training. So we reached out to Tom Bowen, who is with New Chicago Consulting. Tom helps the County Chairs Association. We've partnered with him for the last couple of years in his shop on a lot of our events. So we reached out to him, and Tom comes from a media background to ask him to put this together. So I will kick it over to Tom. Before we do a couple of things that I just want to make sure we go over. One, everyone is going to be muted during the entire session. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please put them in the chat box below. Next, the session itself, depending on how Q&A goes, is going to be anywhere between 30 minutes to 45 minutes, maybe a little longer if we get really into it. But please be respectful and be mindful that we're going to be here for a little bit. So if you need to get up, stretch your legs, go get a glass of water, get something to drink, go make sure you take care of that now. And then again, there are no stupid questions on this. This is an important topic for all of us, so please ask away. And throughout the session, we'll jump in and ask Tom different questions as we're going. So with that, I will turn it over to Tom and take it from there.
Thanks, Dan. I am going to try to talk for just maybe 25 minutes, and then it's really important for me to hear from you all on things that you're questioning, you're wondering about, and I'll start with a little introduction to hopefully get you all comfortable that I maybe not know what I'm doing, but at least I got an idea or two. That's not bad. I started my career as a reporter in Washington, D.C. With National Journal. It was a group called The Hotline, and we covered politics, and I enjoyed it so much that after coming home to do some family stuff, I ended up deciding I was going to work in politics, and my first job was in the press office of then State Senator Barack Obama running for U.S. Senate. And a great place, obviously, to learn because there was a quiet period before the DNC speech when the entire world found out who he was. So I learned under Robert Gibbs, and I've been doing politics since then, mostly as either a press spokesperson or a campaign manager, and sometimes as a manager, I was the press spokesman. So I've done spokesman responsibilities for presidential campaign in 2008, 2 congressional races, U.S. Senate race, and then for Mayor Rahm Emanuel after he was elected in 2011, and I managed his political operation outside. So I want folks to understand 2 purposes of dealing with the press. And I think that'll help frame everything else you think about. The first and the most important is you are here when you're dealing with the press to push some kind of message, some kind of goal. Every conversation, everything you're putting out, and this doesn't always apply with just a newspaper reporter. If you're putting something on a personal Facebook page, it should be sort of geared towards accomplishing some kind of goal. For folks who are chairs, you're pushing obviously the Democratic Party, but you're pushing the Democratic Party very much in your specific neck of the woods. If you're a candidate, you're pushing some kind of story, usually about yourself, because you want to introduce yourself to the voters, but then also something about what you want to do in office or something that's wrong with the way things are going. If you are a staffer or a member of an organization that has a particular goal that's very issue-oriented, like the environmental movement or organized labor or any type of group fighting for legislative changes, you're trying to accomplish something when you're going about your day, and a conversation with the press should be about pushing some sort of message. Now, that's the first objective. The second objective is a little bit counter to that. It's actually to help the folks who are doing the press do their job. They need information in order to accomplish their job. They're going to ask questions in order to accomplish their job. And sometimes what you want your message to be, their questions don't line up very well. So what's tough about this business is essentially answering and responding to inquiries from the press, but in a way that pushes your message. And one of the ways I think I have been helped over the years in accomplishing those two goals is to remember a very simple thing. Very seldomly do you ever have to answer a question in the moment. I tell people usually when I do these sorts of trainings, you should orientate yourself to dealing with the press this way. If a reporter calls you up and says, "What color is the sky right now?" your answer is, "I'll get back to you. What's your deadline?" And I say that in a sort of simplistic way because if your orientation is to answer a question or to essentially help a reporter, get something done really quickly, you're going to do something in a way that's helpful to them and not necessarily you. And look, as a former reporter, I will tell you, the people who were most helpful to me, I treated better, okay? Because I knew they were trying to accomplish their goals, but also respected me. So you do want to be helpful to a reporter, but I also think you need to set in stone certain things that make you better at doing your job. And the first one is you never have to answer a question at that moment. You can always get back to somebody, again, ask them what their deadline is because the publishing schedules are obviously very important. But, hey, I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. Would you mind if I give you a call back? What's your deadline? And then what topic are we discussing, right? So now you have at least a sense of what's going to go on. A lot of reporters use email, text messages, or some kind of social media message these days. So that's great. You get a lot of questions beforehand. But a lot of folks will start with, and even some of my own staff, as they pass on messages from the press, they send me a question. A reporter says, they're like, "Hey, there's this question." I'm like, "Well, what's the deadline? When do I have to answer this by?" That should be your first instinct, is find out what your time period is, and then let's start thinking about what's the right thing to do. What's the right way to answer a question, but also accomplish pushing our message forward? What's the right way to advocate on behalf of our organization or our candidacy? Again, sometimes, when you run for office, it's always really important that voters know who you are before they're really going to listen to what you're doing. Are you going to get an opportunity to answer a question, but also sort of add your bio into it and sort of shape that story in a way that's helpful? So one thing, if you take out of today's training, that you always remember, you don't have to answer that question right away. Find out when folks really need to publish, and then get back to them after you put some thought into what you're doing, okay? So those objectives are a little counter to each other, pushing a message versus being helpful. So let's talk about a couple things that are important on the message side first, and then I'm going to talk about a couple things that are helpful to reporters. So first on message, you should be thinking about your message as almost your Bible, your North Star, the thing that guides you throughout the entirety of your campaign or your organization. Maybe it's working on some kind of legislative session, or you're in an organizing drive or organized labor, whatever that sort of top line message. Very simple, 30 seconds. They call this the elevator speech. Can you explain what's going on in 30 seconds in a very short elevator ride? Your top line message should dominate how you think about what you're doing every day, okay? If you're the Biden campaign, for example, in a contest against President Trump, his sort of tagline there is sort of restore the nation or restore the soul of the nation. I think it's a little bit, to make it a little simpler, it's like, hey, everybody, we made a mistake in 2016. We're going to go back to normal now, right? That's kind of what permeates everything they do. He's calm, right? He's not making erratic decisions about everything. They have a persona that obviously the vice president is very experienced and sort of been around national affairs, that they are projecting through everything they do. And because that organization has a top line message that dominates everything you do. So the first thing you want to do is just kind of write out what's the one sentence, the 30-second version, the 3-minute version maybe the 5-minute version of your message, what you're trying to accomplish. Because another really important thing about communication is content gets repurposed and constantly reused. So for candidates, we like to tell you all, have a stump speech, right? That's your 3-minute, 5-minute pitch that you're going to make to any voter, to any room, to any reporter, right? Very seldomly are you ever telling the voters something you wouldn't tell the press. And almost never should there be something you are telling the press that you wouldn't be willing to say exactly to a voter. I don't want to get into a ton of technique on sort of on the record, off the record stuff. I will touch on that in a little bit, but you should almost always assume, especially in this day and age, that anything you write, say, text, message should be on the record, okay? You know, there's folks who do this professionally and I think have a lot of skill and a lot of practice, can sort of play around with accomplishing and shaping stories, but you should just approach anything you're doing as we're on the record and I'm trying to push, again, that top line message. So I recommend folks, like I said, a sentence, you know, a 30-second pitch, a 1 to 3 minute sort of thing. When you're typing something out, just a useful tip, 75 words is about 30 seconds. So 150 words is a minute. So if you want to type out, you know, a 3-minute speech, right, you're going about 450 words. So I recommend you write that stuff down. And I recommend, again, you know, you're writing a message to your supporters, you're writing a message to your donors, you're, you know, doing some sort of report. If the first thing that your organization, your candidacy, whatever it is, isn't sort of centered around that top line message, then it's not dominating what you're doing every day. And it's going to be hard for somebody else on the other end of it to receive it. Part of dealing with press is essentially communicating through the press to voters. And it's hard for, you know, voters have a lot of stuff going on in their lives, especially now, right? You got to keep things simple, you got to keep things direct, and you got to repeat it, right? So we want to always be saying the same thing. So from dominating and communicating message down to sort of techniques and stuff that helps with reporters. You should understand that the press industry has been absolutely assaulted for almost 20 straight years. And that was the beginning of just websites, bad business models, and not a lot of good things replacing it. So most folks that you will deal with in the press, whether you are in New York City or down in Jefferson County, you are going to have folks who are stressed, not paid terribly well, and not, I would say, you know, this industry is attracting people who care about great stuff, but aren't necessarily the folks who were attracted to the industry, say 30, 40 years ago. You need to be helpful to them. You need to get stuff to them in a timely fashion, in a very clear way, and in a way that hopefully meets their deadlines. And as you develop relationships with them, just understanding and treating them like normal people that are in an industry that is extremely stressed. They are afraid of their scoop, so to say, being beaten by somebody else tweeting it. They are afraid of, you know, organizations, you know, the quote unquote big bad Democratic Party just sort of manipulating them. So they sometimes have a chip on their shoulder on sort of how they're dealing with things. So they're perhaps going to come into a relationship with you in an adversarial position because they think a lot of politics and politicians and folks who work in it aren't necessarily normal people. So you do want to be helpful to them. You want to make sure that you're easy to reach, that your phone number or email or, you know, your messages on Facebook or something like that are getting to you in a timely fashion, because I will tell you as a reporter, one of the most annoying things I ever faced was just putting phone calls into people and not getting called back. So if nothing else, return a message. Very, very simple. I heard from you, right? I'm sorry I can't answer your question. Now they know to move on to somebody else. I can't get to you now, but I'll, you know, help you next time. You know, thank you for thinking of me. And it isn't a bad idea, especially those of you who are candidates and party chairs, and, you know, folks who have plans to be in the media for some reason in the future, it's never a bad idea to touch base with those folks well before any story ever happens. 20-minute coffee, especially if you're candidate running in an area, goes a long way to those folks thinking about how they should be covering you. And again, they know you're a normal person. They know you can be useful in promoting some of their stories or helping them write their stories. Then they're going to treat you better. And they're not necessarily going to change a quote that, maybe you said on the phone that wasn't artful. Sometimes they do that. They're not necessarily going to, give you the right to comment on a big story over somebody else that's relevant. But when you are in an adversarial position with the press and they have an opportunity to mess with you, then a publishing deadline is 4 o'clock and you get a call at 3:35, and you're either no commenting it or you're saying something so quickly because you're nervous that doesn't come out very well. So develop that relationship with those set of reporters that you're hoping to work with. And even if it's just, here I am, here's how you reach me, right? Most of those folks have so much on their plate right now that it's really hard for them. And at the end of the day, all of them, when they go through journalism school, are taught that they're in the Constitution. They're the First Amendment, right? So they believe strongly, and especially I would say this administration has demonstrated such hostility to the press, the free press, and such blatant mistreatment of them. They're not the happiest people right now. And they're, like I said, they got a chip on their shoulder, just the industry's not that well, and they haven't been treated terribly greatly by, the current world. So don't mistake that an overworked, tired, and, maybe not that salient to the beat reporter, you can just bowl over them. You catch the wrong one, again, like I said, I very seldomly have met a reporter that hasn't reminded me that they are the First Amendment. You treat them with respect for a vital piece of democracy. I mean, we know half the stuff we know about Trump, not because he's been transparent in releasing it. It's because reporters are constantly working that beat. And that's how the citizenry is informed. So in our, set of tools to help reporters, I can't emphasize enough, just responding to messages, making sure you're very reachable. And again, for those of you who are candidates and in particular organizations, getting together like the information, that basic information that people need to know, your biography, your date of birth, a headshot, right? The basics, we call this a press kit. Getting that stuff together and making it very easy for reporters to access will be helpful to you when, then they do have to cover you for some reason. They're not fumbling around and they're just going to pull your Facebook, headshot, which maybe that's you with a silly hat on, right? Get a press kit together or an issue brief if you're an organization working with them during some sort of legislative session. Here's what you need to know about us, right? And it's 1-2 pages, very short, and communicates, again, back to the other thing we're talking about, your top line message. So those are two kind of major things I want folks to digest from this in, how you deal with the press. And then the other thing I'd like you to sort of think about, and we'll talk about for just a few minutes here, and then I'll start taking some questions, is at any given moment, the world can change quickly in politics. Obviously, just a month or so ago, coronavirus all day, and somebody who is a candidate who is a doctor is much more relevant than they were 2 months before that. Today, after the last couple weeks of protests after the murder of George Floyd, a candidate who has experience on issues of criminal justice reform is going to be more likely to be, for example, sought out by newspaper reporters or any type of reporter for a story they're doing. So the world can change very fast. You obviously have to pay attention to what's going on. And I think one of the best things about the modern age of politics and the number of people who essentially broadcast through a social media channel is you can see great people, smart people, elected officials, press staffers. You can just see them out there. So follow a wide diet of people who are involved in the type of politics that you're involved in, whether it's, say, the pro-choice movement or it's, agriculture policy. There's folks out there who are just like you, and they're great places to grab inspiration for ideas and statements. If you're constantly dealing with the press, then you should be sort of jotting down or taking down some of those things that they're saying in a just kind of regular document for you. But if you're not, I would, take a look at an issue that's going on, look at somebody's statement, and just sit there and digest it. Like, what's good about that? What message is coming through? Do I get that right away from reading that? Here's how I would do it differently. Practice is always going to be the best way for you to become a very effective communicator. And if you have lots of opportunities to be doing press, there's sort of stages of difficulty. We like to have folks do radio before a live TV interview, for example, because radio is very seldomly actually captured, and it's sort of less, there's less sort of people to hear it if you flub. Print lives forever, right? Your opponents will catch a print clip and use it against you. Radio doesn't, very few TAC ads have radio citations. Live TV, obviously the most difficult medium, and the number of folks that have to do that sort of stuff are pretty minimal, especially, some sort of combative one-on-one type of thing. But practice, I can't tell, makes perfect. There are podcasts, local shows out there. There are things that you can get your opportunities to become good at this. And I can't tell you how many times, folks just sort of assume, I got this. I don't really need to think too much about it. Write stuff down, do practice Q&A sessions with your staffers, with your associates, with, your party organization, throw a hostile, weird question at yourself. And so like, how would I answer that on the fly? Try to do things in phases up there. And then, you're going to be able to be very effective at helping folks do stuff and still pushing your top line message. So that's 20 minutes for me, which is right about where I wanted to go. I would love to hear from you all on stuff that you're thinking about. And, don't always just assume it's a question about the press. I mean, you got a Facebook page that's got, 2,000 followers on it. That's a medium at which people are consuming stuff. So think outside the box on anything that you want to ask about. Dan, why don't you go ahead?
Go ahead, and I'll remind everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll start going through them. One, you kind of touched on, I had a couple of questions that I wanted to get to as well. You were talking about practicing with different questions. Is that something that, does it get easier the more you're dealing with it? Because, I've been doing interviews for the association now for a couple of years. I still get nervous anytime I'm talking to a reporter. Is that something that's just going to come with more experience then?
Yeah, the butterflies in your stomach and the fear of a mistake or something like that lessen as time goes on. Also, some people are much better at this than others. I will say that something I observed in my kind of personal dealings with Mayor Emanuel compared to his dealings in the media, he's actually, I think, a person who just has a lot of nerves. And I think you can see him after you deal with him in a personal, medium compared to media that he just, will make some mistakes in some of the things he's saying. Whereas in a private setting, he's got it cold. Like, you're just naturally going to be nervous in some of these settings. Sometimes it's better for you to help fashion a statement and have somebody else be the one delivering it. We as party organizations always love to actually have the spokespeople of any particular message we're trying to break through in the press, ordinary people, right? Who cares what the county chair of Sangamon thinks about Trump's ag policy compared to a farmer who's actually being hurt? Voters care about that person more than they care about the political organization or the politician. So sometimes the right answer, of course, is always prepare and work out your nerves as best you can by just rehearsing and practicing. sometimes the answer is also, let's get somebody else to be the spokesman for what we're trying to accomplish, because that's the better person to push that message.
All right. So here's a good one that I know a lot of first-time candidates and our chairs are really hesitant on. What's the best way to deal with a reporter who comes off as like a gotcha type reporter that's trying to set you up on a question?
Right. So they can only print what you say. And, you know, the corollary to reporter calling up and asking what color the sky is, me waiting to respond to them and then calling them back. If I say purple, they will print that, right? So the answer you give is just as important as the questions that are asked. And if you can tell someone's in a little bit of a hostile, you know, stance to you, writing the answer to a question out and emailing it to them and be like, this is, you know, my response to this story. They respond back with, well, you know, that's not my question, blah, blah, blah. More often than not, they are sort of paralyzed by their desire to quote unquote balance stories. This, you know, works out very negatively for us at the national level because Trump just lies. But more often than not, whatever you give them is what they'll print, especially if they need to have your comment. If it's, you know, if you're a candidate, someone's attacking you, they always have to sort of give somebody else the response. So just having your answer be, again, really related to what you're trying to accomplish, but also not, you don't have to answer that question. You can push your message and the answer you want to give. And if they don't, you know, put you in there, sometimes it's much better to have sort of nothing come from you than something poor.
Okay. How would you suggest that a candidate or a county chair recover from bad press?
So it depends what the press is. If it's a you know, hot moment topic and you're just really on the wrong side of it, you know, apologies go far, but sometimes the answer is just you need to disappear for a little bit. You know, the bad press problems are different in how you recover, quote unquote, recover among your supporters, swing voters, you know, the reporters themselves, and then kind of, you know, larger peer groups. So I will say that no matter how bad you think anything you might have done in the press might be, just remember that voters have a lot of stuff going on in their minds and they kind of forget stuff over time. So just being a little distant from the news can do wonders. And, you know, it's also, we're human, we make mistakes. So giving a, you know, heartfelt apology on a topic after you made a mistake, after you listened, right? And that's an important part of all our jobs, is to listen. You listen to people who you may have said something, you know, in the wrong way and have offended them, that people are forgiving. I mean, for crying out loud, you know, the guy in the White House is the best example you could ever give that you don't have to be perfect to do public service, right? Voters are willing to look past quite a bit of stuff as long as they believe you're on the right side of their issues. So don't be afraid to just own up, say you're sorry, move on, and again, get back to what you're trying to talk about.
Okay. Here's another one that I was thinking about earlier today too. What if we have a situation where we feel the reporter has either misquoted you or mischaracterized your response on something and didn't truly reflect what you had meant? How do we go about kind of cleaning that up or responding moving forward?
So I don't expect a lot of folks to have this as their sort of automatic process, but from the professional side, as candidates and as staffers, try to record everything. It is easier than it's ever been in your apps and whatnot on your phones to just literally hit a button and record things. I mean, if you do a meeting by Zoom, right, you can record it really easily. A record is important, and especially at high level races, especially when you have opponents on the other side of you constantly picking at you, try to record everything so that there's an accurate reflection of the record. The number one easiest way to get your correction is the reporter wrote the wrong words, okay? Context and, you know, sort of the shaping of a story, that is largely up to them. I do think if you start, you know, a process with a reporter and you're getting them an answer in a timely fashion and they have longer, you know, stretches on which to report and write something out, much easier than, you know, his deadline was 4 o'clock and you gave him a statement at 3:55, right? Being that kind of person won't make it easy to get things corrected or modified more to your liking. Reporters are pretty good and editors are pretty good these days about adding context, you know, especially web stories. So, you know, you're just going to have to feel them out and put that ask in. But the other simple thing is just send an email, right, to the reporter to answer the question, or a text message, because that's really hard to misquote.
Yeah. Here's one that I think a lot of us, you know, the first-time candidates or candidates just in general are hoping for. Our opponent does or says something wrong and starts getting some bad press. For candidates or even the county parties and the chairs, how do we, or what are your thoughts on the best way to respond to that with the press?
So whenever a bad story pops on, you know, an opponent, the best thing to think about, obviously if you can get into it and criticize them and get some positive things for you, go for that. The best thing to think about is, how does that story reach its second and third phase? How does it get covered again? And, you know, having, say, a story about, you know, a senator have a bad vote, right, in the legislature. Okay, that bad vote, you know, Democrats criticize, you know, Senator X for bad vote. That's one story. Who's that vote hurting? Who's the person that is affected by that vote? You know, you do need to take some actions that common stuff on our side of the aisle. You know, protest can get covered, conflict tends to get covered in the media. So, you know, it's a bad agriculture vote. A couple of farmers, you know, stand outside the office. You know, you're generating a petition and hundreds of people have signed it. You need something else to kind of drive that second phase of it. But you should think about sort of natural progressions in the same topic, because it isn't always about the publication that covered it. It's about one that didn't, right? And they need a fresh angle to cover it, because the first 3 letters in news are N-E-W. So what you need a new angle on the story. So if a channel 2 covers the story, or CBS covers the story, all right, you know, it's about this Democrats criticizing the senator's vote. Now, who's it affecting? Now, let's try to pitch, you know, the ABC station, because we've got a new angle on it, right? That's not an easy thing to figure out. It takes time to sort of learn this. But I will say, very little stuff in politics, I think, is really that new and innovative. You see this stuff happen at the national level, you know, statewide level. Like, you're copying a lot of tactics that other people are using. And again, there's a lot of Democratic press staffers that are on Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is these days. Just follow them. They will show you all the stuff they're trying to accomplish every day. And the DCCC, Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee people, and National Republican Congressional Campaign people, and follow the other side too. Watch what they're doing, right? They've got ideas that are just as good. Watch them and their tactics. I mean, God knows how many press releases they put out every day. They're just meaningless drivel, but it's the way you generate the second and third phase story. Another thing, by the way, in just sort of observing the world, almost every major organization puts their press releases in some sort of, in the news section on their website. You can go through and see just about everything that every major campaigning candidate is doing, and you can learn a ton from them.
Okay. For both our candidates and chairs who might not already have this, how do we go about putting together our press lists? Either for
Good question.
Countywide or county board race or county organization?
The first and foremost is, what are you reading yourself, right? And how are you contacting those organizations? So if it's a weekly, usually there's a masthead somewhere on the inside in the back, which is the publisher, and a way to contact them. Call them up. Who should be on your press list? Who should be on my press list? Who's covering, XYZ in our neighborhood here? A lot of larger mainstream publications have easy to find staff sections, and you want to have somebody that's relevant. If you're pitching environmental issues and you're, sending it to the business reporter, you got to have a really good hook for that to happen. So you need to find the environmental reporter. But it's painstaking, and you got to do it one at a time, or you just borrow one from somebody who's already done it at a larger scale level. And then also something I recommend these days to a lot of my clients, when on the communication side of stuff we do, don't sleep on the fact that Facebook groups have tens of thousands potentially of people watching them on particular topics. And some of them are very politically oriented. Like we have seen on the Democratic side, a sort of wing of it grow through the indivisible community. I don't know if they're as fervent as they were in 2018, but every cycle I have seen, somebody kind of rises and falls, and it's much easier than it's ever been to create a community that's interested in a shared issue. And a press release doesn't always have to go to a reporter. They can go to a Facebook group. They can go to, a labor union that has a large newsletter, right? Or an organization, a progressive organization that's got a large email list, right? Your job is to get a message out there. It doesn't necessarily to use the press to do it.
Okay. Talking a little bit more on the social media front, how would you suggest for anyone to kind of put together what their social media profile is going to be? How do you lay the groundwork for that?
So the first thing I would tell everyone is you need to be who you are. Don't try to be somebody in a social media channel that you are not. It just doesn't work. People sniff this stuff out. So it is perfectly fine for a social media channel to just be a medium by which you're broadcasting the content that you're already creating at the campaign level. If it's just a simple, series of tweets that tell people who you are, right? And it's almost verbatim of your about section. I think you should understand that certain things are not very reflective of kind of voters. And social media definitely is a platform that I just don't think voters consume the same way a bunch of us do. People who are very politically interested, or gardening interested, or pizza interested, flock to kind of their own spots in social media where their like-minded friends are. So the Facebook group, posting that is a neighborhood community sort of thing, you shouldn't assume that they're all going to want to jump into politics. You do want to jump in there once and try to invite people to join you, right? But you shouldn't spend all day, in my opinion, kind of using those as, free opportunities to kind of talk to people. It tends to be a place where activists pick up a lot of information, and there's some evidence that you can do some paid media through things that are very that have penetrated really well. Like Facebook, like older people have Facebook, but they're not on it enough, in my opinion, to treat it as the same thing as, you know, getting a story on the evening news. So you got to balance kind of what you're doing. But the important thing is to be who you are, and to kind of have whatever permeates and drives your campaign permeate through that social media structure. So if you are a candidate who's really trying to do some great things on healthcare, well, you need to be talking about healthcare on your social media channel, and in a personal experience way that voters can appreciate and understand, and telling real people's stories. So I recommend, just from a usage standpoint, Facebook is more real than anything else. There's more real people that are part of it. Twitter is 90% bots and people yelling at each other. And there's some reporters there, but I don't feel strongly that people need to have Twitter channels. Instagram has more reach than people think. And that is, you know, largely an image-based medium. So you're not, you know, doing terribly long things, but, you know, you are, you know, posting a quote and a picture of your organization there. You're all not young enough to do TikTok, and you're also gonna like find something new in 10 minutes, because, you know, the world just sort of keeps changing on this stuff. I don't think Facebook will go away, even when they eventually slap antitrust stuff on it. And I think it's a good, useful tool for a lot of reasons. So it sometimes serves as a substitute website because it's really easy to set up and it's easy for people to find it. So I'd recommend Facebook, you know, first and foremost, and then, you know, kind of feel your way out on other stuff.
Okay. Just to remind everyone again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We're kind of starting to wrap up a little bit here and want to make sure we get to everyone's question. I know if we asked everyone who's on the call tonight, if they know reporters that are, you know, these are the liberal reporters, these are the conservative reporters, you know, we know, and we have a perception of what their political bent is going to be. If we get a call from somebody that we think is on the other side, are we supposed to engage with them? Or if we're like, you know what, we're going to get bad coverage anyway, we just won't return that call? How do we deal with when we think we're working with the opposition reporters?
Right. So democracy is a hand-to-hand combat type of thing. I recommend that, to the extent that it works for you, engage everybody. Like OAN, no, because that's a Russian conspiracy theory factory. Fox News hard side, sure. Tucker Carlson, I mean, you know, again, we've talked about practicing and doing stuff like that. If it's an opportunity for you to do that, I wouldn't begrudge anyone from doing it. But there's, you know, a large organization that's really trying to manage its message every day, the Biden campaign, they shouldn't go on Fox News. That's pointless. That's more of a minefield than it is an opportunity. But very few publications, even the prof papers, or the, you know, Madison County Legal, whatever it is down there, that the insurance people fund, like, spar with them, right? Practice your craft. You write your stuff, you know, send them an email. You don't have to do it on the phone, but go ahead and engage with folks, because, you know, whether you're going to change your mind or not, that's less important in my mind from a communication standpoint than just going through the process of doing this and getting good at it and getting really practiced. One thing that I just said that made me remind me, I forgot to give you all a quick little rule of the road. So I want to do that real quick. I want everyone to understand two terms. On the record, which is on the record, can be quoted extensively and everything. And then there's not. Don't mess around with background. Don't mess around with off the record. The differences between them. Reporters kind of don't really respect them depending on what they think their version of it is. But there is on the record, And then you should assume when you're off the record or on background or whatever it is, very seldomly are you going to want to use the differences between the two of those to try to shape a story. So I would basically have things as you're speaking on the record, you can be quoted, or it's off the record and you cannot be quoted. And you should state beforehand when you deal with a reporter, this is off the record. Is that, or do you agree? Or is that okay? You need them to acknowledge it, right? That's the sort of way to do it. Because a lot of people, you get comfortable with the reporter, you're talking with them, you're saying X, Y, and Z, and then you say something, and then you say at the end of it, by the way, that's off the record. Like, don't do that. Just be on the record or be off. And sometimes you need to be off because you want to tell them the truth of what's going on. You want them to understand stuff. And, you know, like, that's fine. They want information. Remember, the whatever drives people to be reporters is just an insane amount of curiosity. So you can talk to somebody off the record and tell them what's going on and tell them where you think they should find a tip or whatever else to get their story going. But for most folks, you know, 90% of the folks that deal with the press out there, either be on or off.
Okay. And why don't we go ahead and we'll end with this one here, because I think this is a good point for some of our first-time candidates. Without getting too far into the weeds, because I think this is a longer discussion, how would you kind of put together your framework for a simple press release of an issue or response to an opponent? You know, what's your kind of framework when you put that together?
Sure. Just a simple technique side of it, you need to have contact information, usually upper right-hand corner, left-hand corner, sorry, upper left-hand corner. You have to have some kind of title on it, which is the sort of catchy part of it. And I always like to have a little subtitle that sort of hammers the second point. Then the front of it is usually the date, the location of it, the date line, because that's where they would be putting that in the story. Some kind of intro paragraph, and then I usually like to get to a quote right away that kind of hammers home what that intro paragraph is about, and then kind of more background, and then usually some sort of ending mark. There's a common one, which is a dash, a 30, and a dash, and that has something to do with the telegraph back in the day, signifying to people that a message stopped. So that's the basic format. Again, most websites of major political figures are going to have their press releases out there. You should just go take a look at them. But the thing about a press release that I think people forget is if you read it as a reporter and kind of just took everything that was right out of it, the best way for it to work is if it was written like a newspaper story, right? There's a headline of what's going on, there's an important quote, and there's a bunch of information sort of talking about what's going on. And again, I think if you read a couple of these major figures out there and how their press releases read, they read like newspaper stories. So write the story. And, you know, some people kind of vary in how they write, whether they're going to start with telling a story and then, you know, how you intro it and how you close it, or you're going to start with some kind of intro and then sort of proceed through your story. Write however you're going to write, but write a story. And that tends to be the best language you can use for any type of press release as you go along. And, you know, look, punchier quotes and attacks and stuff like that are more likely to be covered, right? Conflict tends to get covered more than anything else. So I wouldn't begrudge anyone doing that sort of stuff. But it should be really clear. It should be quick and to the point, not too wordy. You know, reporters are kind of trained to edit down whatever their first, you know, take on something is to a smaller piece. Say what you just need to say and say it very clearly.
And that's something, if anybody's looking for examples on press releases, we have all of our press releases on the county chair's website, IDCCA.org. It'll give you a good framework on how to put together your press release, or get in touch with us. We've got a bunch of different examples that we can send your way on what to do. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, Tom, for your help tonight. A lot of really good information for our county chairs and for our candidates. Thank you again, everyone, for participating. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please reach out to us. It's dan@ILDCCA is my email, and I can get you in touch with any of the info. We also are recording tonight's video, and we're going to be posting that to our YouTube channel, so that if there's anything, if you have questions that you might not have jotted down enough notes, you'll be able to refer back to that. Also, make sure you're checking your emails going forward. We've got a whole stretch of training that we're going to be rolling out here for the rest of June and July. That's going to be virtual training, and we hope that you're able to participate. So again, thank you everyone for participating tonight, and have a good evening.
See you.